Hello and welcome to the Pro-Human podcast, the audiovisual accompaniment to pro-human.co, the blog and newsletter where I, Neil Moore, write about the value of human creativity and culture in what I perceive to be an increasingly inhuman world. And to discuss one aspect of that today, I'm joined by Shaun Davies. Shaun is what I call a proper journo. He earned his stripes doing the crime beat for the Sunday Telegraph in Sydney and transitioned into digital, as we all had to in the early 2000s, becoming the managing editor of 9MSN, the Australian editor of the BBC News website, head of Digital News Hub at MediaWorks New Zealand when that was thriving as the #1 portal for online news deep down under. But now you do something very, very different, something that might be almost antagonistic to your former career or your former profession. Tell us now what you do now, Shaun, and then we'll get into why I'm interested in that.
Obviously, I wouldn't frame it up as being antagonistic, but I could see why someone would think that. So, look, I've always been sitting in the cusp between like technology and editorial and creativity. And I was working at Microsoft and had front row seats, well, actually more than front row seats. I was on the field when a newsroom was basically transformed from being human driven to AI driven. Now, I didn't make this decision, but it did impact me in that I had to let my entire team go. This was at Microsoft's MSN News, which, yes, it still exists. If you look in the bottom left hand of your Windows 11 and you bring up a big news feed, that was us. And I had a team of editors who programmed the site and to satisfy the audience. That meant it was a one-size-fits-all product. In the same year as the pandemic, a new vice president came in and we had to, in a very short period of time, sack all of the editors. I thought I would lose my job too, but I held on somehow. And found myself in a completely new world where all of a sudden news was being curated entirely by AI. And you had engineers working to create algorithms that were a recommender system similar to Facebook's. And then there was a part of, instead of having editorial judgment per se, you had what's called content moderation, where you set a series of rules about what you do and don't want to promote. And then you create AI algorithms that can take action on those rules. So I suddenly found myself from working with journalists, I moved to working with data scientists and engineers and became a product manager on the content moderation side. So I brought a lot of what I had from being a journalist, my news judgment, my understanding of what is and isn't appropriate, and set a lot of the rules for how these things work. But yes, I did find that my day-to-day work changed quite substantially. I learned a lot about data science and I was able to participate in some pretty impactful work. I also got a lot of headaches, as when something terrible came up on Windows, usually the first call would go through to me, Shaun, how the hell did this happen?
Got it. Now, that was, that's an incredible moment for your career to pass through. And you made a success of it. You come out the other side and you're sort of this AI and technology consultant for newsrooms. But before you made that transition, just be honest with me, was there a bit of you that was grieving for the old days or I feel like on LinkedIn, everybody's so desperate to prove how okay they are with all these developments in the future. And I think it's okay to take a moment and go, well, I built my career doing this one thing and I really loved it and it changed beyond recognition. And there was a moment of sort of sadness or trepidation. Or did you go through that? Did you feel that?
Oh, the trepidation continues. But certainly, I mean, as I made my entire team redundant during a pandemic, there was great sadness and regret. And a lot of uncertainty for everyone there too. A lot of concern about what would happen to the quality of the information that we were putting out. And some of those fears, I think, were not unfounded, although I think we fixed a lot of the problems as we went along. But in terms of the value of journalism, this is something I still believe in very passionately, even in the face of not just AI and technology, but in the sort of overall devaluing of what you might have called the mainstream media in the past. Those skills that journalists have, the practices, I think they are real skills, real practices that help us have a better information ecosystem. And I think sometimes in the rush towards, well, AI can do this or AI can do that, certainly the journalism industry doesn't forget about these things, but others might. But information integrity is essential to the way democracy functions. If you can't trust the information you're reading, it really breaks down trust between groups in society and makes it harder to get good outcomes. So it's actually something I remain passionate about.
So in your current role where you're working with newsrooms and news organizations, associations to try and upgrade and upskill with AI, are you managing to sort of maintain this balance? What's the message you're taking into these clients?
Yeah, so what I've done recently, I was working directly with Google and continue to at the moment. We started in Australia. We've since moved to the Philippines and should be next to Japan. And what we did around that was put editorial integrity at the heart of every AI experiment. I created, along with this great AI consultant, used to be the head of data science at IBM Australia, Jason Jingshi Lee. We worked together and we created a set of safety principles for small and medium newsrooms, which I'm happy to share with anybody. It's a set of principles that help you, maintain a sort of flexible policy towards what's coming in terms of AI. The reason we use principles is because once you write a policy on AI, it usually has to change about a month later because something new comes out. And then a series of operationalizing steps. So going just beyond the kind of highfalutin language, we care about transparency, we care about data integrity and things like that, to, okay, so what do you need to do in concrete terms to make that a reality? So that was a big part of the program, and we created that as a bespoke thing for this particular program. And what that meant was that everybody had to have at least one, and preferably two or three, safety KPIs with actual hard numbers attached against them. So we would measure things like hallucination rate, accuracy, these kinds of things that we know are problems within the system, and set a red line threshold, like this is the point at which we won't launch. This is the point at which we say, no, this is not sufficiently good to go out into the public. And then also we had to think very carefully about, well, where are humans coming in here? So how is the human going to be introduced to check? There's a variety of ways to do that depending on the level of risk associated with it and the level of, being public facing makes it particularly risky, right? And so we did a lot of testing around that and made sure that we felt comfortable that we were putting it out with the same level of editorial quality that we would have if we were using humans.
Okay, so how are you now applying this in newsrooms? Give us an example of perhaps an organization you've helped. Particularly, I'm interested in, with the decline in local journalism, which I think is fundamental to how democracy works, your ability to augment and amplify the value of local news is of particular interest to me, I think.
Right. Yeah, we have a few good examples of that. I'd say I can give you two quick ones. Mm-hmm. One was, there was a newsroom called the Yorke Peninsula Country Times. They're in Kadina, which is in South Australia, about an hour and a half from Adelaide. They're a family-run newspaper, been around for several generations. And Michael, who was the owner and publisher, came to me and said, I know, just act like I don't even know what AI is. So we started from that point together. What they had trouble with is because the drop in revenue has meant that it's harder to maintain editorial staffing at the same levels. They were finding it very arduous and a little bit kind of burnout level to get the amount of editing done to keep the standard of the newspaper at the level that they were happy with. So we worked together on creating a really simple implementation, which was a sub-editing tool. And they essentially, they tested this sub-editing tool, which they called Doris. Doris was their operative editor, who sadly now has dementia, and they thought, oh, this is a nice tribute for Doris because she was like the guardian of quality at the paper for many years.
Very nice.
And so we went through a series of tests. They refined their style guide and uploaded this into Gemini, which has a very large, what you call a context window. Do you know what that is, Neil?
I do not know what that is.
So the context window is the amount of data that the model can hold in its memory at any given time.
Okay.
And Gemini has what's called a million token context window. And a token is essentially like a word or a phrase. It's a little bit fuzzy, but it means it can hold about 1 million words in its memory at any given time. And that means you can drop your whole style guide into Gemini and it can reference it in terms of making decisions. So we worked through that. We did a lot of testing, got to the point where it can handle a interim step of editing. Still goes through the editor as the last step, but it means that she gets much cleaner copy, particularly around community submitted content, of which they have quite a lot, and which is typically a mess, right? Like, because they don't know how to write the style. So this gives them a cleaned up version that at least you're maybe it's saving you 50% or 60% of the work. And that was quite impactful. So that's one example. I can give you a second example if you're interested. Yeah, the second example was a bit more scaled. It was a regional newspaper group in Victoria called Northeast Media. And they have a very technically proficient product manager there. He created, they noticed a problem where a lot of their newsrooms who are in the same government area would rewrite the same press release from a politician and then get some quotes, some contextualizing quotes to get a story out. But because, again, like all local newspapers, they are pressed for time and pressed for money, they were like, this is wasted work. How could we maybe make this more efficient so that we're only producing one master copy of this press release and that's getting shared and maybe localized somewhat as the last step? So what they created was an automated system to take these press releases. Again, it was a Google product to send through to Gemini. And they actually used Microsoft's Power Automate platform to make this automatic. So a press release drops into Outlook, and Power Automate sends the press release to Gemini and says, please write a first draft of this story. Then the original press release and the first draft are stored together in a database. And the reporters can then come in and pick up that copy, which is more or less written to style. And they did tremendous and deep testing on this. In fact, I think they did the best testing out of anyone and proved up that it was probably something in the realm of 90% of the copy didn't need to get touched. So it's doing really well. And then one newsroom takes on the master editor role where they write through the story and then it's available for everyone just to pick up. And the impact there was that they were able to turn these stories around much, much quicker. Can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but they were also saving time right across the organization.
Okay. So I'm all up for efficiency. As I say to people, this whole podcast is enabled by technology. I use the Descript platform and it will cut it to some extent with AI and it will subtitle it with AI and it will offer me suggestions for short clips and things like that. So, technology enables me to be a one-man publisher in a way that I couldn't before, and that gives me an outlet to the world. So as I say, I'm not in any way anti-tech. I'm just pro-human. And I think we're at a moment in history right now where we get to set the rules for how these things will develop in the future. We're not going to stop it, but we can perhaps guide it in a direction that is more, pro-human, I would hope. And the reason I reached out to you was that you actually worked on one very specific project that you talked about on LinkedIn, which fascinated and frightened me in equal measure, basically. So you worked with one local, sort of small local news outlet to help them produce a podcast, but the host is AI. And I was just about to sort of dive into your LinkedIn comments and tell you how awful this was. And you'd actually, in your full post, you'd written how an example of another podcast that had been sort of AI powered. And the thing that differentiates them is not that they're AI powered. It's sort of the intent, it's the way you went about it. And there's gray area there, there's nuance there into what makes one, I think, sort of ethically superior to the other. But also I think it raises more questions. But to start with, just explain the podcast you worked on and how that was different to or better than or ethically superior to the worst case examples.
Sure. So the worst case example was actually not a podcast. It was a live DJ that was running on radio stations in Australia. And it was essentially not disclosed to the audience that it was AI. So this AI DJ was playing music and making, fairly generic DJ comments. And this went on for several months before people sort of noticed that there was something off. And it came out that it was actually an AI voice created with 11 Labs, which is the best known of the voice cloning technologies out there at the moment. So what I find kind of a little bit off-putting or like I don't think is a sensible thing to do for a number of reasons is they did not clearly disclose that AI was involved in producing this. They just created it and launched it. And the problem with that is twofold. One is like you say, you're in ethically questionable territory. I think there's quite a few studies that show that people expect to be informed if AI is used in such a open-facing kind of scenario. And there's also a tremendous reputational risk for your company in this case too. Like when people find out, that can blow up in your face quite badly, like this has, with a lot of news coverage and the like.
And how did they find out, by the way? What was it that sort of gave the AI away?
I imagine it would be something to do with the generic patter, maybe the disconnection from reality, the sameness that might have occurred, depending on the prompting that they did. I think it would very likely repeat itself quite often. So unless they had a very sophisticated prompt that somehow tracked what had been said previously, I think if you listened enough, you would start to hear very sort of things that were strangely reminiscent of what had been said before.
Got it.
But I won't know for certain.
AI sort of eating itself. And what was the reaction? I mean, how did people respond? How did they voice their displeasure?
It was journalists were writing articles about it. I think though the first I saw it was someone on LinkedIn saying this is no good. And I don't think there was many people stepping in to defend this use of AI. It does seem and I think disclosure is important. So it's a good thing to talk about how we approach this with the riverine grazier.
So this was the news outlet you worked with to develop an AI hosted podcast, but in a very different way. So yeah, go for it.
So the riverine grazier is in the small town of Hay in southwestern New South Wales. And there have been, again, another long-standing local newsroom, but they are very small. There's only a couple of journalists. But they're also acutely aware, like most of the other regional publications, that they need ways to reach new audiences that aren't consuming the traditional paper or even the website anymore. So that means that essentially to be a newsroom these days, if you have an existing legacy product that you need to serve, but you also need to get into social and podcasting and all these other different mediums where you can reach your audiences, that's very challenging if you've only got 2 or 3 journalists. Like the money still largely comes from the newspaper, but the future is in reaching audiences outside of the paper or finding new ways to engage your audience within your own environment, but that's harder. How do you get people to come to you? So usually you need to go to where the audience is. But if you can't find the time to create a podcast and how long it takes to create a podcast, it's not insignificant, right? And on top of that, you're putting out a weekly paper. That's tough. So they came to me and they said, well, look, one thing we would really like to try is, could we take our paper each week, use AI to summarize what's in the paper, and then use AI to read it out? And I knew that we could do that, but I was concerned that a very generic AI voice might alienate their readers. I was also concerned, and we were all concerned, that cloning their voices may also alienate their readers, although this is what we eventually chose to do. So like with the DJ, we cloned the voice of the owner, Krista, using 11 labs. So you basically you record at least 30 minutes worth of high quality audio, and this thing comes out with an eerily lifelike voice. So I have my own AI voice that I use for various things.
Am I talking to it now? Like, it's definitely you, right?
Actually, I can send an avatar of me next time.
Wow.
But my wife made one of my kids actually, and my wife was like, delete that now, because she didn't like the robots having my kids' identities somewhere deep in the machine.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I deleted them. Kids are a bit disappointed, but they do like making dad say stuff.
I'll bet. No, of course you don't need to do your homework. Eat chocolate instead.
So we cloned Krista's voice, and we were getting good results, but the concern, not just with me and Krista, but even in the kind of like brains trust that were supervising the program, everyone was a bit worried about this project. We all thought there could be some negative blowback from doing this. So what we want to do is, unlike with the DJs, we want to move as transparently as possible through the community because we don't want the Riverine Grazier to lose trust. So what we did was came up with a plan to put the podcast in front of a large number of people and a large cross-section of the local community and get their reaction to finding out that it was AI. So Krista and team made 3 podcasts. One was an AI voice with Krista's voice. One was with a generic AI voice, an Australian voice, but very, very generic radio voice. And the third was done by a human. And the participants were asked, without knowing which one was AI and which one was not, initially to judge the voice. Like, what did you think of this podcast? Which one did you like best? Now, in that one, it was fairly close between Krista AI and the real life read, but Krista AI won out narrowly. No one picked off the bat that the AI was not Krista, actually speaking.
Wow.
So there was a lot of surprise when people found out. But then the reactions were not negative. When people were asked, well, are you comfortable with this? There was generally a feeling that, well, we understand that you're pressed for time and that maybe it's hard to get this out. So if I want to hear this in audio format and you're disclosing that this is AI, as long as people understand this, we're comfortable with that. Now, the groups of people involved included the mayor of Hay. It included the local youth council who were very engaged in Hay and interested in these matters. Some longtime readers of the newspaper. One of Krista's best friends who was really shocked by the voice, that she couldn't tell the difference between the voices.
Wow.
And so that was, I think, a really useful exercise just because we wanted to get that qualitative data. And, I talked earlier about red lines. One red line would be 50% of the people came back and said, this is an abomination. Never, ever out. Like, then we would have said, okay, well, this was a great experiment, but we're not going ahead with this.
Right. And then you've had to find another solution. So I think one of the ways we're trying to save news right now is obviously through using technology to create efficiencies and to cut things. But part of me wonders if does that further undermine the case for having journalists and having news? Is it another sort of tiny paper cut in a sort of long, slow death? Because by grades we go, all right, well, let's replicate her voice because we can't replicate her. And then I just wonder by grades how far it goes forward. Is there anybody working at a sort of national or international level on the regulation for this, on where is that line that we draw between using it to enhance and augment what journalists are doing and then using it just to replace them and make shit up?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of work, not so much in regulating. I don't think governments are likely to get involved in how people produce media, except in extreme cases like mis- and disinformation, although that legislation just got knocked down in Australia. We did have a proposal out. But there's a lot of thinking going on about the ethics of using AI in newsrooms. I think the industry as a whole, like journalists themselves are often very concerned about this, and there's a lot of resistance in the newsrooms. Up at a leadership level, I think most people accept that these tools are going to be ubiquitous and need to be grappled with within the context. And I think within the industry, there's also a lot of lessons learned about the shift to mobile, and before that, the shift to digital, the shift to video and social. In each case, the news industry was a bit slow to catch on to what was happening. And in each case, lost revenue, lost some sort of influence, ceded eventually control of the information ecosystem to large digital platforms largely from the US. So there's a sense that they don't want to get left behind again on this. There's a broader set of questions too. Yeah, I get the concern that like you could just have AI bots creating content and you see this already with AI slop, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of bad stuff out there. But if you're moving into a world where agentic AI becomes a reality, where instead of humans browsing the web, you might have AI agents going out sourcing things from the web, agents talking to agents to try and, gather a personalized news feed for an individual person, for instance, might be something. You might send your agent out to all of the different newspapers who you might subscribe to. And then the agent says, okay, these are the stories this person's going to be most interesting in. And then this is just me riffing, maybe make a micropayment for each of the stories and then bring that back as a digest for them to read each morning.
I like the idea of micropayments, and I've always been a big fan of that because we do gather our news from different places. But I worry in our sort of politically polarized times, we have two issues here. One is that the mainstream media is already struggling for credibility, for belief. Trust is fundamental to news, and the line between what is considered slop and is not slop is really a matter of taste. And I worry that it further undermines, the trust in news. The second thing is we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from entirely personalized news feeds, and that's going to further entrench polarization. It's going to further, encase people in a bubble of their own views, and I just can't see how this isn't inevitable.
Mostly the idea of the filter bubble has been somewhat disproven in the research recently. There was a good set of research done by the Reuters Institute of Journalism in Oxford, and they tested this idea of the filter bubble. And what they found was really surprising, which was that actually people on social media, even partisan people who try to exist within their bubble, just through the nature of the algorithms, do get exposed to other types of content. They see these viewpoints. However, there was another great study that came out, and I think that there's real truth to this. The problem isn't that people can't see other points of view. It's that extremely partisan people, and there's growing divide in society. I think there are more and more very partisan people will just tend to be dismissive of anything that doesn't align with their point of view. So it gets hard to talk to each other because essentially there's two different epistemologies, two different ways of viewing the world. So that particular piece of research said, look, the problem with mis- and disinformation when you look carefully at the research is for the majority of people, I wouldn't say the vast majority, let's say the 60% of this will persuadable, or even if they have preferences one way or the other, are pretty reasonable. And then you've got 20% either side. Maybe it's 30%, 10% actually, depending on your political stripe. And those people will believe just about anything. They typically have a mindset that is not sort of rooted in fact finding and the scientific method. Instead, it's I believe this thing and therefore I will look for evidence in anything to support the thing that I already believe. And those people are very vulnerable to being sold on narratives that may be manipulating them for some purpose. So then that becomes really interesting in how you deal with it. I mean, one thing I'm actually more concerned about is I do think people are discerning about high and low quality news. High quality can come in all kinds of forms. There are great podcasts out there, even from people like Lex Friedman or even Joe Rogan, although he brings people on who I think are questionable and got rightly questioned and grilled on that by Douglas Murray recently. He's still relatively, it's a long podcast. There's a lot to chew on and make up your mind. I don't think he's a bad actor per se. So those people, though, are typically appearing behind subscriptions increasingly. Maybe you've got the biggest names are able to play at scale, but a lot of newspapers that are high quality are behind subscription, behind paywalls. And then what you have is this divide between those wealthy enough to afford that higher quality information and people who are sort of left with whatever's going out for free now. Now that at the moment is CNN's thinking about bringing in a paywall, but CNN's still free for now. The Daily Mail probably stay free. New York Post. There's lots of free websites out there still, but that's where the slop comes in too. So the slop is competing with the free sites.
The Daily Mail sidebar of shame. The most valuable piece of real estate on the internet.
And the Mail's far from the worst out there. They have some standards that you've very high, but they're definitely higher than the AI slot machines.
I wish my parents would read a little less of the Daily Mail. You mentioned Joe Rogan there, and I think I'm on Substack, and there's a lot of big personalities on Substack, and Substack are really touting their ability to win over individual journalists who somehow feel perhaps restricted by the paper they're working on or whatever. So the journalist as influencer is kind of a thing, or becoming a thing. Now, the lady whose voice you cloned, let's say, that voice becomes hugely successful. Who owns it? What are her rights?
That's a great question. In Krista's case, she owns the paper. So her and the company are somewhat indelibly tied together. So that didn't raise an issue there. But we did think through this problem because there was also a move on to clone some of the journalist voices, and they were keen to do it. But I said, well, let's hold up for a second and let's think through what this looks like contractually. What happens when this employee leaves, which, with younger people, inevitably they will. What we arrived at, everybody was happy with, was just a simple contractual clause that said, if you leave, we'll delete your voice. We won't use it anymore and we will get rid of it. So if that's a simple way to do it, but I could see if a voice became useful for a particular person, if they got really popular, they might want to transport that voice along with them. And I think we'll see a lot of interesting scenarios like this, as not just voice avatars, but full digital, like video avatars, become more commonplace. The question of who owns the voice, who owns the face. If you built up your following because you were employed by the New York Times, do they have some ownership over your face and voice? These are going to be questions that are tricky to sort out. And I would imagine at some stage there will be conflicts over this. And they will go to court, and then it will take a while to get settled in terms of what's established precedent and case law, country by country even.
Yeah, one of the things that worries me as well is this, if you have a particularly well-known or popular or trusted personality, why not just keep using them? Why not just freeze them in their prime and just keep using them over and over again? Frequently the name of Walter Cronkite is invoked as sort of the peak of respectable, trusted news. Why not resurrect him? In the UK, they've just resurrected Michael Parkinson as an AI to interview people on a new podcast because he was the most successful. The reason I bring this up is one of the things I do when I have the chance is I'm an actor in Singapore. I work, I'm on TV here and stuff. But the opportunities for sort of young actors come through. We need a clearing out of the guard. Tom Cruise has to die at some point. I don't think necessarily I'm the replacement, but he's the biggest money-making vehicle they've ever had. So why take a chance on a new person when you can keep making Tom Cruise films forever and ever and ever? We have enough footage. Do you think, does this something that's concerned you, the idea that we just settle on one perfect newsreader and we just use them forever and ever? Does it have an impact on younger people? Is this the sort of thing that's going to come up in these licensing arguments? I know it's a bit outside your scope, but this is kind of where my brain starts to unravel with this stuff.
No, you don't sell yourself short, Neil. I'm sure that you are the next Tom Cruise, and it's come for you.
Not with these teeth, not with these British teeth.
Look, it's a really interesting thought. My instinct says no, because each generation wants to remake media in its own image. Young people also present differently. So sure, Parkinson was a great interviewer, but he doesn't interview in a podcast style per se, right? He would have been a great podcaster, but there are subtle differences in the way that you present. It's more like a magic trick at the moment.
It's novelty, but it's got a novelty value.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that people will still want to see authentic new voices emerge. I think the value of human connection probably matters more in an AI-driven world. People are going to be at some stage flooded with so much AI content they can generate their own, that having a human involved may take on an outsized value given time. We just don't know how these things are going to play out, right? Like, we are humans and we have certain feelings about humanity and about how we connect to other people. And we also have feelings about technology and AI. Like, there is no doubt that AI gives people the ick at times. Yes. I was just we went back and watched Rogue One. Remember that Star Wars film?
Yes.
Now that Andor's... Yeah, so Rogue One, can't remember if the controversy at the time was around the name escapes me, but there's the Admiral who is in the film.
Yes, I do know. Yeah, I remember this. I remember reading this.
Yeah, and he's a bit plasticine-y. Now I know that I moved past you, something like that. But, people didn't like that so much. No, it's been perfect. I don't know, maybe they'd be okay with it, but maybe not. We don't exactly know how people will react to these changes. What's going to be acceptable and what's not is, in my view, a little chaotic.
Things are starting to emerge. One of the ones that, and again, I've got this sort of Black Mirror brain that sort of, amplifies it to the worst possible conclusion, but ABBA Voyage. 4 ABBA avatars selling out every single night in London. It's an absolute moneymaker. You build the thing once and you just press play every night and you count the cash as it comes in. And it's been so popular, there's rumors of it opening in, Vegas or whatever. My concern is that I have a theory that corporations, despite what's sort of painted in their reception areas and in their handbooks, they hate diversity. Any corporation wants to sell one product to as many people as possible. It wants everybody in the world to drink Coke. And if I can take ABBA Voyage and I can put it on a disc and I can open it in New York, London, Las Vegas, Paris, Singapore, Hong Kong, and everybody in the world's watching the same thing, why wouldn't I? And as much as I think there is some degree an appetite for new things and younger people and people in your own image, often you're not given the choice. For a long time, I really struggled in Singapore to find any underground music because there was no venues for it. The people that brought in big mainstream acts to play at the Marina Bay Sands for very, very rich people. There was no room for younger acts. So I suppose that's my worry, is that AI enables people to sort of settle on not necessarily what's most interesting or unique or best, but just what works, and then replicate it over and over and over again. And how do we make the case for demanding diversity when I'm not actually convinced corporations really want that?
Yeah, I feel again that the novelty factor is really important there. Like, remember when people first, the stage that we're in now is like, with movies, it's the train coming towards the screen, right? And that's where it's like, or with television, it's like people reading radio plays on the television, which is some of the first TV was. They're like, why don't we just televise these actors like reading the stuff?
Yes, before we developed a visual language that suited the medium. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. And so right now you've got that same kind of like fun house. Oh my God, it's ABBA. And they're up there singing and this is really exciting.
Oh my God, I can giblify my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think Miyazaki would have reacted that way.
No.
But I think people will get past that pretty quickly. And then the question becomes, like, I think there might be AI-driven experiences or experiences that involve both AI and human that we haven't imagined. Instead, I actually put my bottom dollar on. I mean, this is Marshall McLuhan stuff, right? The medium is the message. The medium is transformative in terms of the way that messages are received. Right now, we're in the early stages of this new, it's not a new medium per se, but it's a medium transforming technology, I would say. And we're going to see new implementations. But whether this, to what extent are humans involved in this creation, and to what extent would this be AI only? I think there's lots of question marks around that. My feeling is that I don't actually believe that AI is going to develop taste in the way that, to move something along, to create something that really engages people. There's a lot of artistry that goes into that. What is a unique voice? There's something recognizable that we respond to. I think that AI could do a good job of replicating certain voices if it has enough training data, but can it make those sorts of jumps that connect with the age and the zeitgeist in a way that we really feel? I mean, maybe it can, but if I was going to put down a bet on that, I would say no. We're still going to need human creatives in there. I'd be more worried if I was like, so my daughter wants to be a set designer, and I really hope that she can be.
Yeah.
But I do worry about jobs like that. That's the sort of thing where you can now, you're probably going to see pretty effective generation of very realistic scenes that may require less of that hands-on stuff. That said, like, can you get exactly the same effect or as you want if you were an uncompromising director just by using AI? Maybe not. I don't know. There's so much to play out here, and I'm not always convinced of the doomsday scenarios.
I just want to be aware of them so that we can try and avoid them, right? This sort of futures and foresight thinking. I feel like we need to imagine them so that we can try and avoid them. The volumetric screens for filming are becoming quite the thing. Singapore's got them. A friend of mine in the Philippines just built a studio with this in. And I suppose the difficult thing is trying to put a value for the bean counters on doing something in a real environment, because they go, well, you know what you want to film. We can get the what's the Unreal Engine to develop it and project it on a screen, and your actor reacts to it. But the difficult thing to try and sell is the what happens when an actor's on set and the wind starts to blow and the weather's not quite the way you hoped it was going to be, and it forces everybody to adapt, to improvise, and you get something better out of it. You can't guarantee it. You can't necessarily count the value of it, but if the four Beatles hadn't been in a room together and they'd been doing it over Zoom, would we have got the same chemistry? And I think that's one of the, there's a certain, I don't want to, I sound like I'm sort of some magical thinking here, but there is a certain magic, there is a certain chemistry. There's what we call the X Factor. We've built an entire series of television shows around it, the X Factor, that intangible thing that can't be quantified, that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet, but is important. One of the reasons Walter Cronkite is remembered is for his reaction when he read out the news of JFK dying. It gave a poignancy, it gave a significance to the moment that an AI couldn't possibly do.
I agree with you on creativity and magic. There is a magic that happens when people get together. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I feel like engineers and engineering leaders are often very deterministic in their thinking about things like creativity. Like, there is no magic to it. There's only a set of decisions that get made, and ultimately that's creativity. And I think there's something more than that. There's connection that people can sense. Like, that's why you talk about chemistry between on-screen actors and things like that, is because you can actually sense when someone is or is not, there's a vibe, right? Like, so can AI capture that? I'm not sure, but I think we will see like sort of various types of films and TV shows and even news programs going out with different degrees of AI in them. And it will be really interesting to see which ones tend to win out. Now, in terms of I guess what I'm maybe more concerned about in some ways is the distribution mechanism matters, because social media is definitely not my preferred form of distributing content. It tends to pull people into these doom scrolling kind of moments where their attention gets sucked in again and again and again.
Oh, yes.
And that does reward, people who just want to engage people. You create content at scale, and you can put out thousands of videos, and only one needs to take off because it's quite cheap to produce for you to make, financially viable for you. My favorite one, have you come across Muscle Cat, Neil?
No. Sounds amazing.
There was a series, and you can find a lot of them. There's thousands of cat-related YouTube videos. It's always a series of, they're starting to animate them now, but they just started out as still images telling a story, usually of a kitten. Something bad happens to the kitten. Kitten grows up, does a lot of working out, and gets enormous muscles. And then it does something like it saves someone. The most famous example of that, I think, is this kitten's grandmother is a fire, and she pushes the kitten out the window, who's rescued by firefighters, and then grandma dies. And it's always to the tune of Billie Eilish's "What Was I Made For," but with meowing instead. And
this is so elaborate.
Yeah. Then the kitten grows up and becomes a firefighter. It rescues a little girl from a fire. And then, like grandma, the kitten dies in the fire as the music goes, meow, 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 meow.
I can't wait for someone to buy up this IP and make the movie. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen, dude. It's like, it's Skip It in the Toilet on steroids.
Wow. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have a certain faith in the youth. I think we have to. And one of the things we're seeing right now is a bit of a backlash. So in Singapore, we are seeing at the moment, as in my little tiny fraction of the world that we're sitting in here, that sort of groundswell of underground music is suddenly picked up in the last few years. So post-pandemic, people are like, I want to get in a room and I want to rock out. I'm sure there's a lot of pent-up rage and stuff like that. I find book talk quite encouraging. The idea that they're turning back to books and that book sales are slowly on the rise again, but the book industry had to adapt and had to make itself more appealing and more attractive. And it's an aesthetic now. To be a sort of a bookish person is an aesthetic, he said, with his books on his shelf and his typewriter behind him. So I think we can never fully predict how society is going to go. And I think, each generation rebels against the last. So if we as Gen X are sort of trying to, jump on the bandwagon of an AI and make sure that our next 10 to 20 years of our lives sort of remain relevant and employable and whatever, the generation behind maybe not as concerned about it, because we're the ones under threat. So I was speaking at a school recently about creative careers, and there was different rooms, and there were some finance guys went into a room and some healthcare people went into another room, and I went into sort of the creative careers room. And we were all in the staff room beforehand talking about, what are you going to say when the AI question comes up? What are you going to talk about? How are you going to answer it? Across industries. And then on the way out, I sort of bumped into some of these guys by the taxi stand afterwards, and none of us had been asked.
Interesting.
None of the kids sort of said, "But don't you know? Is there any point?" I put it down to in a post I wrote recently to what Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, said, which is, any technology that's around when you're born is the natural order of things. Any technology that arrives between the age of 15 and 25 is exciting and an opportunity. And a technology that arrives after you're 35 is going to bring about the end of the world. And they're right in the middle of it being, the exciting new thing, but it's just part of the world they're born into. The same way that when careers guidance came to my school and tell me about their careers, I didn't go, but what about Adobe Photoshop? Isn't that going to destroy everything for everyone? I don't care. That was just the new thing, So I wonder if I'm more paranoid about it than the next generation. I hope so. I hope they sleep better than me.
I think it all kind of goes down to how it plays out in terms of jobs. I think they will, the place, if you want to get to a Luddite situation of people smashing the AI mainframes, I think if there is a lot of economic value generated by these systems, but that economic value results in people losing their jobs because that is not efficient to have humans doing this work when AI can do it just as well. But then that wealth is not shared back with the community, instead gets hived up in whoever's got exposure to the technology industry, investors take this increasing share of money out of society. I think you actually could see some real civil unrest around that. But, it all remains to be seen. To what extent is this a set of tools that people work with to achieve new things? And in what degree is this a replacement for humans? So, I think, again, it's just something that hasn't played out yet. And if you look at the predictions from, say, big consulting firms about AI's impact, you'll get a headline based on the median trend, and that's usually pretty impressive. But then you'll see that they've got an optimistic and a pessimistic trend. And the optimistic trend is AGI. And the pessimistic trend is this does almost nothing. So the range of
it's vast.
The range of predictions is vast. And that just means no one knows what the hell's going on, right?
Well, McKinsey said that the metaverse would be worth, I think, $10 trillion by 2030. So I don't take their stuff too seriously, to be honest with you. So I agree with you on the job. Bill Clinton once sort of famously said, he was asked if there's anything you could do, one thing you could do to make, America a greater place, what would you do? He said, everybody needs a job. He said, it's a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to go to bed at night. It's a reason to feel proud, to have dignity, to stay on the straight and narrow, to not get in trouble, to not drink your days away. It's having a job. And so that worries me. And to your point about what happens to the distribution of wealth, I think we've already seen it. Sam Altman said that, AI would be able to generate every person on earth at $13,500 a year in sort of unearned income just because of the sheer abundance. And if that's the case, then why the fuck are you unable to pay anybody for their creative work? If it should start now, if there's this much abundance to be created, why the hell is Facebook stealing 7 million books worth of content to train their machines? If there's that much wealth to be generated, there's no excuse for not paying. So I think there's a narrative coming sort of from the people who are most invested in. I put a piece out on LinkedIn this morning saying, whenever I go to these AI events, the people always speaking are always the people who stand to make the most amount of money from AI. And I don't think that's that's not a good balanced panel. I think we need people from different parts of society, not just founders who we're also listening to for their brilliance. There's two narratives which I'm very suspicious of. One is the one that it's going to, bring this huge abundance. I don't see any evidence of that. The second is that Bill Gates was saying recently, AI will be better than humans at almost all things within the next 2 years. And the Anthropic CEO said the same thing. And I think this is a disgusting narrative to share with young people. And if those young people sort of become disengaged with society, I don't blame them at all, because the narrative they're getting is that you're gonna be given loads of money and you're not going to have anything to offer. So don't worry about it. And I think these things are lulling us into a false sense of security. I think they're making us they're lowering our barriers. I think we should remain skeptical. I think we should challenge these people the way that we hold journalists like you held governments to account. We need to hold these people to account, because if we don't, they will sell us this dream, which will really only benefit them, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, look, to what extent is certainly there's a self-interested aspect to the very, very optimistic cases that are put forward by people like that. It's always hard to pick out exactly, how genuine is this and how much is this designed to pump up the share price? And I think probably the answer is quite a bit. And then even the true believers, though, in that AI world about the level of disruption that's coming, there is also a question around how cult-like and, sort of insular has that culture become. There are some real millenarian kind of, apocalyptic scenarios that are often put forward. It's like, I noticed that the paradise, apocalypse narrative is quite strong within the AI community. And maybe this is me misunderstanding the laws of scaling and the power of exponentials, not lacking sufficient imagination to understand just what a moment of inflection we're coming to. But I see narratives that have been repeated in humanity since we were, kind of like since recorded history started. The end of the world, the retaining paradise. So that makes me very skeptical, because there's one thing humans are great at. It's being wrong about almost everything.
I've kept you for nearly an hour now, so I'm going to wrap it up. I use technology to enable, to be a one-man publishing machine. I do think democracy requires, journalists and particularly at the local level as well. I mean, we've seen in the UK, where I come from originally, the bins are piling up in Birmingham because there's a lack of accountability of local government, because they went bankrupt and nobody really knew what was going on. So I really hope that the work you're doing is going to really support those small but essential newsrooms that keep people engaged with the local community. So I am not here to judge. I'm here to try and find the best use case scenarios. And I think that could be one. So thank you very, very much for sharing with me. Thank you for engaging in the discussion between the sort of the ethical and less ethical uses. It is a gray area, and the internet wants you to be either pro or anti, but that's not really how the world works. So I've enjoyed the discussion very much. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
No, we've had a great discussion. I think that we could talk another time, if you want to, about mis and disinformation, as that's a particular topic of mine. So, I'll give you a little scoop here. It hasn't been announced yet, but I'll be the independent reviewer for the mis and disinformation code in Australia, which means I'm the person reviewing all of the platform's reports. So that's coming out. That news should be out in the next week or so. Yeah, so if you want to chat mis and disinformation on time, I just submitted a 45,000 word thesis on it, and we can talk all day.
All right, give me time to read the thesis, because I didn't come prepped enough today, and I think for that one I need to come much, much better prepped. These are the perils of running a one-man newsroom, as you know. That was great. Congratulations on the new job. We will definitely get into that, and maybe with a few of your sort of journo buddies and tech buddies, we can broaden the discussion a little bit. But for now, I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening or watching this edition of the Pro-Human podcast. If you are interested in the value of human creativity and culture, you want to advocate for it, you want to read about it and stand up for it, try subscribing to pro-human.co, where I write weekly about what's happening in the world through a pro-human lens. Watch this on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, all the usual places, and fingers crossed you'll be around for the next one.